Hi, it's George from Any Old Music. I'm not a great reader, not in the sense of my comprehension, rather my focus and concentration are poor, particularly when it comes to reading books on music composition, where my capacity to comprehend the contents, ironically, is much higher. As a result, my ability to get through such books is usually diminished. The reason for this is that these kind of books often tend to send me down rabbit holes of thought and imagination. The mentioning of a technique or concept starts me thinking about how I could use that technique or concept creatively in a piece of my own. By the time I have come around from my days, I have progressed by several paragraphs or pages, and my lack of focus leads me to lose the writer's train of thought and explanation. I then have to backpedal to the point where I lost my focus, possibly even further, to regather my understanding of what's going on. Despite this steady approach to reading, I have developed a modest library of music books. I thought therefore it could be interesting to ask and answer the question, what books would I keep above all others? Or if I were exile, for crimes against music possibly, what 5 music books would I take with me? The books I've chosen are from those that which I own already, and they are predominantly related to music composition in this instance. I suppose it says something not only about myself, but about the innate fulfillment studying music composition, or different arts or fields of knowledge for that matter, provides. Even in exile and possibly isolation, I feel that I will still have both a compulsion and satisfaction for learning and writing music, at least for maybe the first week or so, before the homesickness and despair sets in. The first book, The Oxford Companion to Music, might seem a strange one, and to be honest, it's not a book I think I would have bought myself, but is one that I absolutely cherish now. It was given to me as a 21st birthday gift, and it's just a fabulous reference book. Even now, perhaps even more so with the likes of Google, where I can find things out easily, the Companion is one of the first places that I'll turn to for an answer or a starting point. Therefore, it's also the first one I'd put in my isolation exile survival pack. There is something to be said about a definition set in print as opposed to being online. It could be purely psychological, but knowing the author will not have the option to edit the text gives it more authority, even if that initial statement was incorrect and has been set to print. The author and editor are less likely to want to put their name to something if they have not at least gathered sources to support their definitions, whether those sources are cited or not. I also have the Oxford Dictionary of Music, which is also a good reference for things, but the Companion is a bit bigger, covering a wider range of topics and people and styles and things like that. For example, it has some nice feature sections on composers and certain important period styles or concepts. I could turn to B and get a big section on J.S. Bach or O and read up on something like opera. What I like about this style of reference book is that it cannot afford to be loquacious. It has to drill down and be selective, and I find that interesting too, what it chooses to emphasise and offer extended definitions and descriptions on, and also what it decides to omit and leave out. Although the book does cover universal concepts such as acoustics, it focuses on important figures and styles in Western music. The 2 examples I gave before, for instance, are titanic parts of Western music tradition, Bach and opera. My only criticism, therefore, which garners a lot of debate within music and educational institutions at the moment, is that it ought to specify that it focuses on Western music in some way or other. A modern edition ought to specify that in its title, The Oxford Companion to Western Music, maybe, or possibly The Oxford Companion to Western Classical or Art Music. Although I'm not really fond of the word classical art as terms for defining the music that I mean here. Art suggests superiority to something, some more popular idioms, and classical also has a specific meaning within music too. Using it discounts other music. However, there does need to be a way of specifying that the Companion is focused on that line of music, that area. My second book is one I absolutely adore, even though I've not looked at it for a number of years. It's my favourite Counterpoint book and was one that I picked up in a local charity shop near to where my parents live and where I grew up. It's called Polyphonic Composition and was by Owen Swindale. I figured I might have time to kill in exile and might like to revisit my Counterpoint studies. I probably should. I predominantly self-studied Counterpoint at university and have revisited several times since. I particularly enjoyed the two-part Counterpoint as I felt it was the most useful, whereas the addition of voices seemed to bring with it issues that were not salient to the music that I wanted to write. It was more specific to the style of Counterpoint that the teachers or writers were teaching in their books. I have many books on Counterpoint. I'm not going to get them all out. This one, the Swindale, is by far my favourite and the one that I found the easiest to get through when studying myself. I found it easier to comprehend than Gradus, and there's also this one here that I pulled off the shelf, which is also edited by Alfred Mann, similar style on Fugue. But I found it easier than Gradus, which is an older manual, as it was nicely laid out, the Swindale, that is. One thing I find with older texts is that they can seem like walls of text sometimes, possibly as a limitation of older print methodologies and things like that. However, this one is, the Swindale is more concise and uses well engraved and labelled examples, which I liked. The third book that I would take with me into exile is on the topic of harmony, and it's called The 20th Century Harmony by Vincent Persichetti. Similar to how I found 3 or more voices of Counterpoint study to be less readily applicable, I never found a harmony book that inspired or influenced what I wanted to compose. Where I could easily mould 2-part Counterpoint into sounds and directions that I wanted to go, Persichetti book is similar. Most harmony books taught concepts related to functional harmonic procedures, which typically resulted in pastiche or explicitly homophonic composition. That was fine in and of itself as exercises, however translating that knowledge creatively for me was more difficult. The closest practical manual I came across before the Persichetti was Simon Sector's 19th century text, The Correct Order of Fundamental Harmonies, a treatise on fundamental bases and their inversions and substitutes, 1871. He's still here. However, it just extended 18th century common practice into 19th century practice. For that, it was very good if you wanted to understand that sort of romantic language a little more. As a composer, I was after this to a certain extent. However, I also wanted a combination of different harmonic structures, interactions, voices and relationships that I could pick from and create my own harmonic voice, if you like, which I'm still working on now. I like the Persichetti as it is less prescriptive and restrictive and more suggestive. Furthermore, many of the harmonic devices and concepts it discusses are not outdated, or if they are, they're not too far detached. It simply lists and describes concepts beautifully concisely, as if to say, there you go, do what you want with that information. Another great thing that I liked about this book is that it suggests exercising extensive lists of examples so that if you can access the scores, you can see the harmonic devices he's discussing in practice, giving you more things to study and deepen your understanding of harmony. In exile, I might be able to explore all the things that Persichetti puts forward. Exile is starting to sound like paradise. The fourth book I would take with me is Arnold Schoenberg's Fundamentals of Music Composition. I like this book as it discusses composition techniques in a way that I engage with composition, perhaps because I was taught them and then later came to the book. I'm not really sure. I'm not particularly good at playing instruments, so I generally rely on theory, concepts and engaging with music cerebrally. Schoenberg therefore gives me the vocabulary with which to think about music more objectively and to an extent universally. Similar to the Persichetti, it gives extensive examples and prints short extracts of these examples in the book, therefore you can see the concepts that he is discussing. Another similar book that I have and like is Alan Belkin's Musical Composition, Craft and Art. I think it may have been on the list if I'd been a younger student when this was published and perhaps came to it before the Schoenberg. However, I didn't. The progression for me is Belkin then Schoenberg, which is not to do with the complexity of information. Rather, Belkin's is more accessible in its delivery. In this sense, I would probably recommend it first. However, thinking of myself in exile, Schoenberg gets into the language that I find myself turning to more and more. So it sort of sneaks in ahead of the Belkin. The fifth one may be surprising as it's not another manual, the glaring hole in my selection so far being orchestration, and it's probably because it's not a manual that I decided to choose it for a bit of variety. But it's a book on film music and it's called Scoring the Screen, the Secret Language of Film Music. I love this book as it's a digestible series of analyses on film music composition. Usually each chapter is based around something specific. Could be a specific film or composer or a concept, branching out from that area. For example, chapter 1 looks at Bernard Herrmann's Vertigo, but in doing so identifies consistencies in Herrmann's other scores, whereas chapter 3 looks at Signer's meaning that has developed around the use of certain musical language. Could not dream of being comprehensive in such a big and neglected field, but it has plenty of great observations and pieces of information to offer. This is one of those books that sends my imagination spiralling, and for that reason, being in exile, I might be able to get to it from cover to cover and read every chapter and absorb it. It's an interesting exercise to think about what music books I would keep if I had to get rid of most of them. I certainly have not read all the books I own or read many from cover to cover. Then again, I tend to learn more through extracting a single concept, which is usually confined to a chapter or article that I can then attempt to put into practice. As a result, it does take me ages and an intense amount of discipline to get through those valuable books, which enable that approach. Exile on a desert island might give me that time and focus.